Sometimes the smallest mistake doesn't ruin your life. It quietly opens the door to the future you never imagined. At exactly 8:12 on a cool October morning, Ethan Walker balanced a heavy toolbox in one hand and a folded maintenance report in the other as he hurried through the polished corridors of Silver Pines Lakeside Resort. The maple trees outside had already surrendered most of their crimson leaves, and soft sunlight filtered through the enormous windows, painting warm reflections across the marble floor. Ethan barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else, replaying the promise he had made before leaving home. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had smiled sleepily over a bowl of cereal and reminded him not to miss her school's harvest festival that evening. He had promised, just as he always did. Since losing his wife 4 years earlier, promises had become sacred. They were the invisible threads holding together what remained of their little family. His radio suddenly crackled to life. Maintenance to Building C. Immediate plumbing issue. Présidentielle suite au louet. Possible water leak. Ethan pressed the button clipped to his belt. On my way. He increased his pace, boots echoing softly through the elegant hallway while hotel guests wandered toward breakfast carrying fresh coffee and newspapers. Nobody looked twice at the quiet maintenance supervisor in the Navy work shirt with his name stitched above the pocket. That suited Ethan perfectly. Invisible people often had the easiest time getting their work done. Reaching the executive floor, he found a young concierge waiting nervously near the elevators. Room numbers were switched after housekeeping, she said quickly. Engineering says the leak is inside Suite 1708. Please hurry before the hardwood flooring is damaged. Ethan nodded once without asking unnecessary questions. He had solved hundreds of emergencies just like this one. Water never waited, and expensive repairs only became more expensive with every passing minute. He rolled his toolbox toward the suite, unlocked the service key, knocked firmly twice, and called out, "Maintenance coming in." Silence answered him. Assuming the room was empty, Ethan carefully pushed the door open only a few inches. What happened next lasted no more than 2 seconds. Inside, a guest was in the middle of changing clothes after apparently returning from the fitness center. Startled by the unexpected entrance, she immediately reached for the nearby hotel robe while instinctively stepping back. Ethan's eyes dropped instantly toward the floor. "I'm so sorry," he said without hesitation. "Wrong timing. I'll leave immediately." He stepped backward just as quickly as he had entered and gently closed the door without another glance. His heartbeat raced with embarrassment. Behind the closed door, the woman remained frozen for a brief moment, equally surprised by what had just happened. Neither of them knew that discreet security cameras in the hallway had recorded every second, from Ethan's urgent arrival with his toolbox to his immediate retreat the instant he realized the room was occupied. Within minutes, hurried voices began echoing through the executive floor. 2 security officers rounded the corner. Hotel managers appeared from nearby offices. Guests slowed their footsteps, sensing something unusual. Ethan stood quietly beside his toolbox, confusion replacing urgency as one officer politely asked him to remain where he was. He had no idea that the woman inside that suite was Victoria Sterling, the billionaire CEO who secretly owned every building surrounding the peaceful lake. And he certainly had no idea that one accidental moment, handled with nothing but quiet dignity, had already begun changing his life forever. The executive hallway that had felt calm only minutes earlier now carried a different kind of silence, the kind that spread faster than shouting ever could. Guests whispered behind half-raised coffee cups. Employees exchanged uneasy glances while pretending to stay busy. Rumors always moved quickly inside luxury resorts, especially when they involved someone important. Ethan Walker stood exactly where the security officers had asked him to wait, his toolbox resting quietly beside his boots. He kept both hands folded in front of him, not because anyone had ordered him to, but because years of raising. Lily alone had taught him that remaining calm often spoke louder than frantic explanations. One officer finally approached him with a respectful tone. "Mr. Walker, would you mind telling us exactly what happened?" Ethan nodded once. "Engineering dispatched me for an emergency plumbing leak in Suite 1708. I knocked twice, announced maintenance, received no response, opened the door, realized the guest was inside, apologized immediately, and left. His answer was simple. No extra details. No excuses. No attempt to make himself sound better. The officer wrote a few notes before looking up again. Did you know who the guest was? Ethan shook his head. No, sir. Did you remain inside the room? No, sir. Did you return after leaving? No, sir. The conversation ended almost as quickly as it had begun, yet the hallway continued filling with quiet speculation. A pair of housekeepers passed by carrying fresh towels. One whispered something into the other's ear. The second looked toward Ethan before lowering her eyes. Across the lobby, two front desk clerks paused their conversation the moment he walked by. Someone had already transformed an honest mistake into a story much larger than reality. Ethan felt every glance, every unfinished sentence, every conversation that stopped as he entered a room. Still, he never interrupted anyone to defend himself. There was work waiting to be done. Water pipes still leaked. Air conditioning units still failed. Guests still expected clean rooms and warm smiles. Life did not stop simply because people misunderstood you. Several floors above, Victoria Sterling stood beside the wide window inside another executive suite after quietly changing into business attire. Beyond the glass, Silver Lake shimmered beneath the autumn sun while sailboats drifted lazily across the water. Her executive assistant, Melissa, entered carrying a tablet filled with meeting schedules. Security says the maintenance supervisor is waiting downstairs if you would like to speak with him. Victoria remained silent for several seconds. She replayed the brief moment in her mind. The startled expression, the immediate apology, the way he had lowered his eyes instead of staring. It had happened so quickly that even she was not certain what to think. Did he say anything after leaving? She finally asked. Melissa glanced at her notes. Only that he was sorry. Then he waited exactly where security requested. Victoria slowly crossed her arms. Most people who accidentally embarrassed someone powerful rushed to explain themselves, hoping to protect their jobs. Others became defensive. Some even argued. Yet this man had done none of those things. There was something unusual about that kind of restraint. Downstairs, Ethan received another maintenance request before anyone officially dismissed him from the earlier incident. A restaurant refrigerator had stopped cooling. The pastry chef looked worried. Breakfast service would begin within the hour. Ethan simply picked up his toolbox and walked toward the kitchen without complaint. One young dishwasher watched him disappear through the swinging doors before quietly asking an older cook, "If that happened to me, I would probably spend all day trying to explain myself." The cook continued slicing fresh oranges without looking up. "Sometimes," he answered softly, "the people with the clearest conscience are the ones who speak the least." The following morning arrived wrapped in silver mist drifting across Silver Lake, soft enough to blur the line between water and sky. Ethan Walker parked his aging pickup truck in the employee lot just before sunrise, as he always did, carrying a lunchbox packed the night before and a small paper note tucked inside by Lily. He unfolded it while walking toward the maintenance building. In careful handwriting surrounded by uneven little hearts, it read, "Do not forget tonight. I will save you the best seat." Ethan smiled quietly before slipping the note back into his pocket. No matter how heavy life became, Lily somehow always reminded him what truly mattered. Inside the resort, another busy day unfolded with polished perfection. Fresh flowers decorated the marble lobby. The scent of warm cinnamon pastries floated from a bakery. A pianist softly practiced near the grand staircase while guests checked out with expensive luggage, rolling across polished stone. Yet beneath the elegant surface, whispers still lingered. Ethan noticed them, but refused to feed them. Instead, he answered every maintenance call with the same calm professionalism that had earned him respect long before rumors had arrived. Around mid-morning, Victoria Sterling left her private meeting earlier than scheduled. Rather than using the executive elevators, she chose to walk through several guest areas alone. It was something she occasionally did during unannounced inspections. Reports could tell her numbers, but hallways revealed character. As she crossed the garden courtyard, she noticed a young bell attendant struggling to push an overloaded luggage cart up a slight incline. Before the employee could ask for help, Ethan quietly stepped over, removed 2 heavy suitcases, balanced the weight, and helped guide the cart without saying a word. The bell attendant thanked him several times. Ethan simply smiled, wished him a good day, and continued toward another service request. Victoria watched from a distance without revealing herself. There was no audience applauding his kindness, no manager standing nearby, no reward waiting for him. A few minutes later, another small moment caught her attention. An elderly guest had accidentally dropped a prescription bottle near the walking path beside the lake. Tiny white tablets scattered across the pavement. Several visitors glanced at the mess before continuing on their way. Ethan immediately knelt beside the gentleman, carefully gathered every tablet one by one, sanitized the container with a cleaning wipe from his tool bag, and gently reminded the guest to speak with the pharmacy if any medication needed replacing. The older man squeezed Ethan's shoulder with grateful eyes. Again, Ethan accepted nothing more than a quiet thank you before returning to work. Victoria slowed her pace. The picture in her mind no longer matched the rumors circulating through the resort. Later that afternoon, she reviewed employee files in a temporary office overlooking the marina. Ethan's personnel record appeared almost ordinary at first glance. 7 years with the resort. Excellent performance. Evaluations. 0 disciplinary actions. Multiple letters from grateful guests praising his honesty. 1 handwritten note from a family whose wedding ring he had found beneath a dock described him as the kind of man who restores your faith in strangers. Victoria read that sentence twice. Melissa entered carrying another stack of documents. Anything unusual? She asked. Victoria remained thoughtful. Not unusual, she answered softly. Unexpected. Downstairs, Ethan finished repairing a faulty heating unit before check-in time. 3:38 in the afternoon. Plenty of time to finish 2 more work orders and still make Lily's harvest festival. He wiped his hands with an old towel, folded his tools neatly into the box, and headed toward the next building without realizing that someone had quietly begun looking beyond one unfortunate moment and was finally starting to see the man everyone else had overlooked. That afternoon, the autumn sunlight softened into a warm golden glow that stretched across Silver Lake. And for the first time since arriving at the resort, Victoria Sterling postponed an executive meeting without offering an explanation. Instead, she walked quietly toward the Human Resources office with a single question resting in her mind. She had built companies by trusting facts over assumptions, yet somehow she had allowed one unexpected moment to cloud her own judgment. Human Resources Director Helen Brooks greeted her with a polite smile before placing Ethan Walker's complete employment file on the conference table. Victoria opened the folder slowly. There were no flashy achievements, no dramatic promotions, no expensive certificates framed in gold. Instead, the pages revealed something far rarer. 7 consecutive years of perfect attendance, except for 3 days taken after his wife's funeral. Annual performance reviews filled with phrases like dependable, respectful, trusted by guests, and always volunteers to help. Attached behind the evaluations were handwritten thank you letters from visitors whose vacations had been rescued by his quiet problem-solving. One elderly couple described how Ethan had spent 2 hours repairing their wheelchair after his shift had already ended. Another family wrote that it found their little boy's favorite stuffed bear inside an industrial laundry machine and refused the $500 reward they offered. Victoria continued reading in silence. Near the back of the folder, she discovered an emergency contact form listing only one name. Lily Walker. Daughter. Age 8. No spouse. No secondary contact. Helen noticed Victoria studying the page. He never remarried, she explained gently. His wife, Claire, passed away unexpectedly 4 years ago. Since then, everything has been about his little girl. Victoria looked up. Does he ever ask for special treatment? Helen smiled softly. Quite the opposite. He trades holidays so parents with younger children can stay home. He works extra weekends whenever someone has a family emergency. Most people here know that if Ethan promises to cover your shift, he actually will. Victoria closed the folder, but kept one hand resting on its cover. The room felt strangely quiet. Outside the office window, she watched employees crossing the courtyard carrying fresh linens and flower arrangements, while distant laughter floated in from the lakeside restaurant. Somewhere beyond those buildings, the man she had unintentionally judged was simply doing his job without realizing anyone was learning about his life. As Victoria left the office, she noticed movement near the employee parking lot. Ethan had just finished loading tools into his pickup truck before checking his watch with obvious concern. He drove away a few minutes later, not toward another job, but toward the small elementary school across town. Curiosity overcame routine. Keeping a respectful distance, Victoria asked her driver to take the long route past Maple Ridge Elementary. Cars already lined the curb as families gathered beneath colorful paper decorations celebrating the annual Harvest Festival. Through the open doors of the school gymnasium, children laughed while parents filled folding chairs. Victoria remained inside the vehicle, unnoticed. A few moments later, Ethan hurried across the parking lot carrying a small bouquet of grocery store sunflowers, wrapped in brown paper. He looked anxious until Lily spotted him from inside the building. "Daddy," she called, running toward him with a bright smile. Ethan knelt, handed her the flowers, and apologized for cutting the timing so close. Lily threw her arms around his neck. "You came," she whispered. "You always come." Ethan smiled with tired eyes that somehow still held warmth. "I promised." Victoria watched this simple exchange through the windshield. No reporters, no cameras, no audience. Just a father keeping a promise that mattered to one little girl more than any boardroom victory ever could. As the school doors closed behind them, Victoria realized something inside her own heart had quietly begun to change. Monday morning arrived beneath a clear blue sky, but the calm beauty surrounding Silver Lake stood in sharp contrast to the quiet storm unfolding inside the executive offices of Sterling Resorts. Victoria Sterling sat alone in the security operations room, a place she rarely visited during routine inspections. 3 large monitors illuminated the dim space while Security Director Daniel Morris stood beside the control console with a tablet in his hand. He cleared his throat before speaking. "You asked us to preserve every recording from last Thursday morning. We have them ready." Victoria nodded without taking her eyes off the screens. "Play everything from the moment the maintenance call was dispatched." Daniel pressed a key. The footage began with a timestamp reading 8:09 a.m. Ethan Walker appeared on the first camera, leaving the maintenance workshop carrying his toolbox. Another camera showed him receiving instructions from the concierge outside the executive elevators. The audio clearly captured her hurried voice. "Engineering says the leak is inside, Suite 1708. Please hurry." Victoria leaned forward. Daniel switched to the hallway camera outside the executive suites. Ethan walked briskly toward the assigned room, checked the work order in his hand, knocked twice, and announced in a calm, professional voice, "Maintenance coming in." Both security officers in the room watched silently. There was no answer from inside. Ethan waited. Another moment before carefully opening the door only a few inches. Less than 2 seconds later, he immediately lowered his eyes, stepped backward, apologized, and gently closed the door. Daniel froze the frame. The timer on the screen revealed that the door had remained open for exactly 1.8 seconds. Victoria stared at the image without speaking. "Continue," she whispered. The next recording showed Ethan remaining outside the room, exactly where he had stepped back. He never approached the doorway again. He never looked through the opening. He simply waited until security officers arrived and calmly answered every question without resistance or complaint. Another camera from the opposite end of the hallway confirmed the same sequence from a different angle. Every movement matched his statement perfectly. Daniel quietly folded his hands. "We also reviewed all hallway footage before and after the incident. There is no evidence that Mr. Walker lingered in the area before receiving the dispatch. Everything supports his explanation." The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the computer servers. Victoria closed her eyes for a brief moment. She had spent years teaching executives that facts mattered more than assumptions, yet she herself had almost failed that standard. Not because Ethan had accused her of unfairness. Not because anyone had demanded justice. Simply because a decent man had carried the burden of misunderstanding without asking anyone to believe him. She replayed the recording one final time. Again, she watched him lower his eyes before the door had even fully opened. Again, she heard the immediate apology. Again, she saw him step away instead of making excuses. There was something profoundly honorable about that simple instinct. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Would you like us to close the investigation?" Victoria slowly nodded. "Yes, but I have something else to do first." She rose from her chair and looked once more at the frozen image of Ethan standing quietly beside his toolbox after the misunderstanding, waiting patiently because someone had asked him to remain there. He had trusted that the truth would eventually find its own voice. As Victoria walked toward the door, she understood that some people defended their reputation by speaking louder, while others defended it simply by living with unwavering integrity. She also knew that before another day passed, she would be the one asking for a conversation, because sometimes the most important apology was the one offered before it was ever requested. Late that afternoon, the resort settled into its familiar rhythm as sunlight shimmered across Silver Lake and gentle piano music drifted through the grand lobby. Guests checked in with smiling faces, fresh flowers filled crystal vases, and the quiet elegance of the building seemed untouched by everything that had happened only days before. Ethan Walker was replacing a faulty thermostat in one of the conference rooms when his radio came alive. "Mr. Walker, would you please come to the executive lounge? Someone would like to speak with you." The message carried no urgency, only unusual formality. Ethan gathered his tools, wiped his hands with a clean towel, and made his way upstairs. When the elevator doors opened, he found Victoria Sterling standing alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. She was dressed simply in a navy business suit, her posture confident yet noticeably less guarded than before. For a few quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Victoria took a slow breath before turning toward him. "Thank you for coming." Ethan nodded politely. "Of course, ma'am. How can I help you?" She lowered her eyes briefly, something very few people had ever seen her do during a business conversation. "Actually," she said softly, "I'm the one who needs your help." Ethan looked at her with calm curiosity, but said nothing. Victoria folded her hands in front of her. "I reviewed every security recording from that morning. I also reviewed your dispatch order and every statement that followed. Everything you said was true." Ethan remained still. "I know," he answered gently. Victoria blinked with surprise. She had expected relief, perhaps satisfaction. Instead, she found quiet certainty. "You knew?" she asked. Ethan smiled, with the same peaceful expression she had noticed from a distance several times before. The truth does not become more true because someone believes it sooner. Those simple words lingered between them like the final note of a song. Victoria felt an unexpected weight settle in her heart. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not because you demanded one, because you deserved better than my assumptions." Ethan shook his head kindly. "You were surprised. Anyone would have been. I never blamed you." She studied his face, searching for even the smallest trace of resentment. There was none, only sincerity. "Most people would have been angry," she admitted. Ethan glanced through the window toward the lake where a father was helping his little son skip stones across the water. "Being angry would not have changed what happened," he replied. "My daughter reminds me every day that we only have so much energy. I would rather spend mine keeping promises than holding grudges." Victoria felt her throat tighten. Every executive seminar she had attended, every leadership book she had read, every negotiation she had mastered suddenly seemed far less important than the quiet wisdom standing in front of her wearing work boots and a maintenance uniform. "Your daughter must be very proud of you," she said. Ethan's tired eyes brightened immediately. "She is the best part of my life." A gentle smile crossed Victoria's face for the first time since they had met. I believe that. Before Ethan turned to leave, she spoke once more. Mr. Walker. He looked back. Thank you for accepting an apology that I should have offered much sooner. Ethan gave a small nod. Sometimes grace arrives a little late, he said quietly. It is still grace. As he walked toward the elevator, carrying the same weathered toolbox he had carried every day for years, Victoria remained by the window, watching him disappear behind the closing doors. For the first time in a very long time, she realized that genuine strength was not measured by power, wealth, or influence. Sometimes it looked exactly like a man who had every reason to be offended, yet chose kindness instead. Over the next 2 weeks, the uncomfortable memory that had once stood between Ethan Walker and Victoria Sterling slowly gave way to something neither of them had expected. Their conversations remained brief at first, always beginning with ordinary subjects. A broken fountain near the lakeside gardens. The old maple tree that lost its leaves earlier than expected every autumn. The best place to watch the sunrise over Silver Lake before the guests woke for breakfast. Victoria never mentioned billion-dollar investments or corporate acquisitions. Ethan never asked why someone who appeared to be nothing more than a visiting executive seemed to spend so much time quietly walking the property alone. Somehow, neither question felt important. One crisp Saturday morning, Victoria found Ethan repairing a wooden bench overlooking the water after a storm had loosened several bolts. She carried 2 paper cups of fresh coffee from the cafe and held one toward him. "Peace offering?" she asked with a gentle smile. Ethan accepted the cup with quiet gratitude. "I thought we already made peace." Victoria laughed softly, then considered appreciation. They sat on opposite ends of the bench, while gentle waves lapped against the nearby dock. For several minutes, they simply watched a family of ducks glide across the lake. The silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Ethan finally spoke. Most people rush to fill quiet moments. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps they are afraid of what silence might reveal. Ethan smiled. Or what it might heal. Those words lingered in Victoria's thoughts long after they returned to their work. A few days later, Ethan received permission to leave 30 minutes early so he could attend one of Lily's after-school reading competitions. As he walked toward the parking lot, he noticed Victoria standing beside a small rental sedan with one tire noticeably flat. She looked almost amused by the inconvenience rather than frustrated. Ethan set down his lunchbox without hesitation. "Looks like your afternoon changed its plans." Victoria smiled. Apparently it did. Within 15 minutes, Ethan had replaced the damaged tire with a spare while explaining each step in simple language. When he finished, Victoria reached into her purse. Ethan gently raised one hand. "Please do not." She paused. "You fix my problem." "Neighbors help neighbors," he answered. "Even temporary ones." She slowly returned her wallet to her bag. "You really never make this easy, do you?" Ethan laughed quietly. Accepting kindness should never feel like paying a bill. That evening, Victoria found herself thinking less about board meetings and more about the unusual man who seemed completely untouched by ambition for status or recognition. Several days later, she accepted Ethan's invitation to visit the town's annual fall farmers market, where Lily would be selling handmade bookmarks to raise money for her school library. Victoria dressed simply in jeans and a light sweater, blending easily into the crowd. Lily immediately greeted her with bright excitement. "You came." Victoria knelt to meet her smile. "I promised." Ethan noticed the coincidence, but chose not to mention it. The three of them wandered through rows of apple cider stands, homemade quilts, fresh pumpkins, and local musicians playing old country songs beneath colorful autumn trees. Lily insisted that Victoria taste homemade caramel fudge before declaring it the best in the county. Victoria laughed more that afternoon than she had in months. Watching father and daughter together revealed a world completely untouched by wealth or titles. It was built instead upon shared jokes, simple traditions, and promises that were never broken. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Lily reached naturally for Victoria's hand while holding Ethan's with the other. Neither adult expected the gesture. Neither pulled away. For one quiet walk through falling autumn leaves, They looked less like strangers brought together by an accident and more like three hearts slowly discovering they had been walking toward one another all along. While the greatest secret remained hidden in plain sight because Ethan still had no idea that the woman smiling beside his daughter was the true owner of everything surrounding them. The first Monday of November arrived with crisp air and brilliant blue skies stretching over Silver Lake, but inside the Grand Summit Ballroom, the atmosphere carried an unmistakable sense of anticipation. Hundreds of employees from every Sterling Resorts property had gathered for the company's annual leadership assembly. Fresh white flowers decorated the stage. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished floors. Large screens displayed the company logo, while managers quietly reviewed their presentation notes. Ethan Walker stood near the back of the ballroom, checking the sound system after receiving a last-minute maintenance request involving one of the projector cables. Once the equipment was working properly, he packed his tools and prepared to leave before the executive presentations began. One of the event coordinators smiled at him. "You can stay if you would like. They always recognize outstanding employees at the end." Ethan politely shook his head. "I have another work order waiting." Before he could reach the exit, the ballroom lights gently dimmed. A voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairwoman and chief executive officer of Sterling Resorts." Every conversation immediately stopped. Hundreds of employees rose to their feet almost at the same time. Ethan turned instinctively toward the stage, expecting to see a business leader he had never met before. Instead, his footsteps froze. Walking calmly beneath the bright lights, dressed in an elegant ivory suit, was Victoria Sterling, the same woman who had shared coffee beside the lake, the same woman who had laughed with Lily at the farmer's market, the same woman who had accepted homemade fudge from a little girl as though it were the greatest gift in the world. Ethan stared in complete disbelief. Victoria reached the podium and looked across the silent ballroom. For one brief moment, her eyes found his near the back of the room. A warm smile appeared before she addressed the audience. "Good morning, everyone." Her confident voice filled the hall with effortless calm. "Every year we celebrate numbers, growth, and achievements. They matter. But today I would like to begin with something even more important. Character." The room became perfectly still. Victoria continued. "Several weeks ago, I experienced an unexpected misunderstanding involving one of our employees. I had every opportunity to judge before understanding. Fortunately, he gave me something more valuable than an explanation. He gave me an example." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, already sensing where her words were leading. Managers exchanged curious glances. Security officers standing near the walls quietly nodded to one another. Victoria looked directly toward the back of the ballroom. "Mr. Ethan Walker, would you please join me on stage?" Hundreds of heads turned at once. Ethan remained motionless for a heartbeat before slowly walking down the center aisle, carrying the same weathered toolbox he had forgotten to set aside. The sound of his boots echoed gently across the silent room. When he reached the stage, Victoria extended her hand. Ethan accepted it respectfully, still struggling to understand what was happening. She turned back toward the audience. "This man reminded me that integrity is not proven when everyone is watching. It is revealed when no one expects recognition." She briefly described the misunderstanding without embarrassing either of them, then explained how the security recordings, his employment history, and countless quiet acts of kindness had shown her the truth. The ballroom remained silent. Not the silence of discomfort, but the silence that comes when pride gives way to respect. Ethan lowered his eyes, clearly wishing the attention belonged somewhere else. Victoria smiled gently. In that unforgettable moment, every employee inside Sterling Resorts finally saw the man they had walked past for years, and Ethan finally understood that the woman who had quietly entered his life without titles or privilege was not simply a visiting executive. She was the visionary whose name stood on every building surrounding the lake, and suddenly every conversation they had shared carried an entirely new meaning. The applause that filled the Grand Summit Ballroom lasted far longer than Ethan Walker believed it should. He stood quietly beside Victoria Sterling, uncomfortable with being the center of attention, while hundreds of employees rose to their feet once again. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like the same maintenance supervisor who still had 2 unfinished work orders waiting in his truck. When the applause finally faded, Victoria stepped toward the microphone one last time. "Today I am announcing a new position that reflects the future of this company," she said. "Director of Guest Experience and Property Integrity. This role is not about luxury. It is about people. It belongs to someone who understands that every guest, every employee, and every promise matters." She turned toward Ethan with a warm smile. "Mr. Walker, if you are willing, I would be honored for you to become the first person to serve in that role." The ballroom erupted again, but Ethan simply looked at Victoria with genuine surprise. "I appreciate your confidence," he answered honestly, "but I have never wanted a title. Victoria Nadidiently. That is exactly why you deserve one." A quiet ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Ethan thought about Lily. He thought about the example she watched every day. Finally, he smiled. "If accepting this position allows me to keep helping people, then I would be grateful to serve." Months passed, and Silver Pines Lakeside Resort slowly became known for something far more valuable than elegant rooms or beautiful views. Guests remembered the kindness of its employees. Staff members noticed that senior executives now spent more time listening than speaking. Victoria often walked the property without announcing herself, just as she had before, except now she was rarely alone. Ethan frequently joined her during those early morning inspections, and their conversations continued exactly as they always had, filled with ordinary moments instead of extraordinary titles. One snowy afternoon, just before Christmas, Victoria visited Ethan's modest home carrying a box of homemade cookies that she insisted were slightly overbaked. Lily opened the front door before Ethan could reach it. "Miss Victoria," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around her without hesitation. Victoria hugged her tightly, laughing as flour from Lily's holiday baking apron dusted the sleeve of her winter coat. Inside the little house, warm cinnamon filled the air while an old record player quietly played Christmas songs. Nothing about the home reflected wealth, yet everything reflected love. They decorated cookies together, laughed over crooked icing, and watched snowflakes drift outside the kitchen window. As evening settled across the neighborhood, Lily climbed onto the living room sofa between the 2 adults she loved most. She looked first at her father, then at Victoria. Her small voice broke the comfortable silence. "Can I ask something?" Ethan smiled. "Of course you can." Lily reached for Victoria's hand before whispering with complete innocence, "Would it be all right if someday I called you Mom?" Time itself seemed to pause. Victoria's eyes immediately filled with quiet tears she did not try to hide. She looked toward Ethan, uncertain, respectful, waiting. Ethan gently placed his hand over both of theirs. His smile carried years of grief, healing, gratitude, and hope all at once. "That is not my decision alone," he said softly. Victoria knelt beside Lily until they were eye to eye. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "if your heart ever chooses that name, I will spend every day trying to deserve it." Lily wrapped both arms around her, and for several beautiful seconds, no one spoke. Outside, snow continued falling across the quiet street, while warm light glowed through the windows of the little house. In that peaceful silence, no one thought about billion-dollar companies, executive offices, or the accident that had first brought 2 strangers together. What changed Ethan Walker's life forever was never wealth. It was the simple truth that quiet dignity, patient grace, and an honest heart eventually find the people who recognize their worth. And sometimes the greatest miracle begins with nothing more than a door that opened by mistake and a promise that was never broken.